CEO of Greater Rochester Enterprise. A little bit of a commercial about us. We're here to help companies expand in the Greater Rochester region, and I just want to take a couple moments as the intro piece to let you know that we're encouraging our community and those beyond to really get real. I'd encourage you to go to our website and look at some of the facts and statistics that we're promoting as we work to attract companies to the region, companies like LiveTiles, EmployeeChannel, helping brand networks expand, and I can assure you that we've had a lot of success based on some of the facts that you're going to hear in more detail as Richard works with our panelists. So again, when you think about talent, the cost of doing business in this community, our access to trucks and our proximity to major metropolitan markets, and also the ability to connect, which I think is an interesting part of the fact that we have this conference today. The connectivity in Greater Rochester is largely just one phone call away from solving a problem. And I think you'll see, while we have three separate companies here on stage, you'll see the connectivity and really the synergy that is growing, especially in software and information technology and beyond in Greater Rochester. So with that, I want to introduce Richard to take us away, but also please remember, be positive. There are a lot of good things going on. We've had 17 company expansions in the region so far this year, almost $100 million of new investment. The promise of creating 1,100 new jobs and retaining 1,300 jobs, and that's across the spectrum in software, information technology, food and beverage manufacturing, optics, photonics, and imaging. So when you hear the naysayers who may talk about snow, remember it's just fresh water falling from the sky. It allows us to do a lot of things in this community. Our short commutes are a good thing, and we can leverage the talent, creativity that we have to do great things as we grow into the knowledge economy. So with that, Richard, the ball is yours.
Thank you, Matt. I feel honored that you were opening up the panel. You're doing great work at GRE, an organization that was formed perhaps almost 20 years ago. And I recall being there at the birthing. It was a very different time. And Rochester has come a long way over the last 20 years. Obviously, we have a storied past, and we haven't lost all the incredible assets that have made this community so world-renowned. And I'm honored to be with these panelists who represent organizations that are domiciled in San Francisco, Boston, and New York, cities that you might be familiar with. And Rochester certainly shows up on their map. And notwithstanding the fact that many people in this town have actually, not necessarily been as positive, I know you guys are. And I have this sense that Rochester is presently this wet piece of clay, and we have the ability to shape it, and shape it in a way that actually brings us back to the glory that we deserve. We have so many assets in this community, and the panelists today are going to highlight some of those assets that have been under-recognized. And this is our moment to seize the opportunity that is present and before us. So I want to identify the three. I'll give a short thumbnail about each. We have Mark Oney in the middle. And Mark is a product of upstate New York. He grew up in the Southern Tier. He went to that school just down the road off Scottsville called RIT. He was an double E. That's easier to say. And currently resides in San Francisco and is involved in his 8th startup called EmployeeChannel. Mark also spent 10 years in the late 80s through the 90s at Apple Computer. We have Dan Diefendorf over here, who grew up in the Hudson Valley and attended Ithaca College. There's a theme going on here. And he is a senior VP with LiveTiles. And we have Jeremy Frick, who's with Brand Network, and he's the SVP of Technology for Brand Networks. He grew up in Rochester and also attended RIT. So I want them both, all three of them, are skilled. They live in the entrepreneurial world, so they know how to provide elevator pitches. And if you can briefly describe what your company does.
Great. Hi, everyone. Dan Diefendorf. I oversee basically our America's business for LiveTiles, and I'll go a little bit to what LiveTiles is in a second. But Brighton resident, been flying out of Rochester for the last 10 years. Have an apartment in Upper West Side, New York City. So my wife and 4 kids, thank you all for welcoming us back to Rochester in many ways. So LiveTiles is an interesting company. At the root of what we are, we're a user experience company. What we do is we build on Microsoft's tools and platforms they have to basically disrupt the market in terms of what used to be. It used to take long development hours, customizations, and long time cycles to basically bring to market all the things that we want to be able to use in our work lives. So all the technology, whether it's portals, internets, mobile apps, we integrate with over 200 applications that bring all that together. So you can basically spend a tenth of what you would have spent on long development cycles and so forth. So we're a very visual company. The way we started was interesting. We actually started in Australia with our co-founders, Carl and Pete. I actually met them having built a competitive company to them. And we've developed a relationship over many, many years. We are based in New York City. We're publicly traded on the Australian Stock Exchange. And we have about 20 offices around the world, all sorts of areas. As of it stands right now, we have about 225 employees, 75 of which are in Rochester that we've all hired this year. And this has actually now become our largest concentration of employees around the world for us. So it's been sort of a nice journey, and maybe we'll get into it a little bit later how that all happened.
Great. I'm Mark Oney with EmployeeChannel. EmployeeChannel builds an intelligent organization communication application. What that means is we help companies generally of 1,000 or more employees communicate and engage their employees more effectively in two-way dialogue. We do that using mobile, cloud, and artificial intelligence. We're about 3 years old. Founded in San Francisco. We closed another round of financing in January. And at the time we closed the financing, we got some feedback from our investors and board that our burn rate was very high, no surprise. The competition for top talent in San Francisco is very intense, and it's prohibitively expensive. The salary inflation in the Bay Area is borderline ridiculous at this point. So we got some guidance to go offshore to expand our engineering team and some of the other functions. I've offshored before. I'm not a big fan, especially in a startup. I think it's a bit of a panacea. So instead we said that we would look at onshoring or nearshoring. So I had some experience in Pittsburgh, Dallas, Toronto, Portland. But I'm also on RIT's West Coast Advisory Board, and I've been spending a lot of time over the past 3 years helping RIT look at how they might go about deepening their relationships within Silicon Valley. So that gave me good cause to add Rochester to the evaluation list. Obviously, Rochester had a little bit of an unfair advantage in the mix. We started flat-footed in February. The first introduction was to GRE, and Matt and Leah were extremely helpful in helping us do a lot of the introductions. I was very worried about the length of time it would take to get through the process, working with state, county, and city officials. And one of the things I emphasized to Matt early on is we need to operate on a startup time frame. And that's not measured in quarters and years, that's measured in weeks and months. And to GRE's credit, as well as the responsiveness from a lot of the state, county, and city officials, we were able to get things up and running in a matter of months. So we have a space right down the street at 40 Franklin. We have an initial team of 5 that is taking names and kicking ass, ramping up very, very quickly. We'll talk a little bit more, I think, a little bit later about what that means in terms of the caliber of people that we've been able to attract. But we're very excited to be here in Rochester.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Frick. I lead technology for Brand Networks. In short, Brand Networks really bridges the gap between kind of the walled gardens of social networks and marketers and advertisers. So I'm sure many of you have experienced this. You go on Amazon or Google and you search for something, a piece of technology or something, and then you go on your Facebook feed an hour later and suddenly that thing shows up. You're welcome. We help make that happen. I'm sure everybody loves that happening. But really, there was a strong separation between how marketers and advertisers work and the language that they spoke and the things that Facebook, Pinterest, Snapchat, the things that they were creating. They were speaking technology. Marketers and advertisers were speaking marketing and advertising, and never the two were meeting. So we help bridge that gap. We have 55 people here in Rochester, all technology, not all technology, I actually Kyle will be mad at me. I'm filling in for Kyle. He's our VP of marketing. He's in Rochester. We have marketing, we do have HR, but most of our staff here in Rochester is in the technology space. Out of those 55 people, about 48 of them are tech, and that's the team that I lead here in Rochester. So happy to be here.
I want to identify that all three of your companies are presently located in significant, historically significant buildings in Rochester and downtown. So you guys are located in the old trolley building, right overlooking the falls.
Yeah, it's been great. In fact, we were actually roommates with Brand Networks for about a month and a half. And they were creating a new office, and we were about to renovate the current space.
Yeah, and you're in a building that's owned by ROC, that is Rochester Savings Bank, when they built bank branches to look like churches. It's just stunning.
It's a great space, and you know, it's Park Incubator, Park Colo, so we're intermixed with, in fact, Data was moving out shortly. They've been occupying the space for some time, and it's that nice environment, having other startup companies within the building.
Yeah, and you're located in the famed, right off Parcel 5 in the Midtown Tower, which has a storied past as well. I suspect it's hard to find real estate like this in the valley.
Yeah, certainly not at the price point we're paying here.
Yeah, so I think you started touching upon this. Go in whatever order you like. Why the hell are you in Rochester? And it's a big world out there,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of other great universities that train people in computer sciences and these other skills.
And you know, honestly, it's something I think the other guys have touched on this a little bit. We do have offices in a lot of other sites, a lot of other cities, including Sydney, Australia, New York, Boston, Detroit, Chicago, all the main cities. We had a technology outfit out of Santa Monica, Los Angeles, California for a little while. But the reality is the mix for the talent that we have here, that we can get here, the people that we can attract from the university systems that we have, for the price that we pay, is impossible to beat. I really feel like it is it's such a positive place to be. Real estate obviously plays a part in this as well. We do have a sales office and a managed services office in Manhattan. The price that they're paying per square foot there is crazy compared to what we pay here right in downtown Rochester, on a gorgeous site we just built out. It's really hard to argue with what we can get here in Rochester. It's very hard to compete with it.
You continue, but I suspect you have outside investors, and you have a board, and they help make these decisions. So you have all these other folks that are aware of this.
Yeah, in our particular case, what we had done is, we really wanted to get a global feel because we have a global family in place, and so we put a lot of people in different locations, everywhere from Hobart, Tasmania, Melbourne, Sydney, West Coast, East Coast, Chicago, about 4 different offices in Europe, and we really wanted to have the ability for, we actually refer to it as our global family, and because one of our pitches to our employees is, one of our values is that they can actually work in different locations at different periods of time, whether it's piggybacking off of a vacation or maybe spending 3 weeks in London. We want to encourage that to get more synapses and more relationship building throughout the world. But our business, we're going to our 4th fiscal year now, and we're growing at 300% a year every year. And we weren't getting the focus and concentration that we needed across all our major lines of business and the types of roles that we had. So we came up with this idea of creating what we call this intelligent user experience hub, where we can have all factions of our business in one location to create more scale around it. And we looked at the upside of building the way we were building, the downside of the way the money would have been looked at if we had spent it in a different fashion. It became a no-brainer for us. So we started a global search to go off and do this, and we looked a number of cities in the States. We actually looked internationally as well. And it came down to really North Carolina and New York. And in the end, again, we all have a connection to Rochester. At first, I wasn't sure we wanted the operation here, particularly just because I'm on the road a lot, and our strategy wasn't to build it around leadership. But the more we got through the process and the relationships we built, I see Bob Duffy there in the back there, and Matt and others from the state, it really became, we saw a lot of investment in why we would come here. But it was also an interesting process just to work and see the types of, the variety of people we can get, the seniority of the people, And I'm talking across digital marketing, content marketing, customer service, customer success, as well as a very, very deep technical roles such as AI. And everyone talks about AI, but when you break it down, you look to hire AI roles in cities like San Francisco and New York, and you had 3 or 4 bullets on that job description, and you're basically creating $1 million salary in people, because a lot of this stuff is forming. So we saw an opportunity to do it with the universities here, and plus with also some of the other tech companies that have landed, to start building that competency in town, because everyone, whether we know it or not, we're all going to be an AI company one way or the other the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, ours was very similar. When we started looking at different locations, this was first and foremost a financial decision for us. We knew that our burn rate as a startup was too high. We had to hire a lot of fairly senior people in San Francisco because we were at that 29 guys in a dog stage, not a big company. And we have a lot of core competencies that are part of our value proposition, our differentiation. So, it was native mobile application development, web application development, DevOps. On the research side, it was natural language processing, machine learning, data science, et cetera. So we had to hire a lot of senior people. We didn't really have a lot of bench depth. And we knew as we wanted to scale up the company that we had to have a more economic model to scale up. So we couldn't scale up strictly in San Francisco. So when we started the search, in addition to those financial considerations, we wanted to have access to a pool of really top talent, and going for a lower cost model didn't mean that we were willing to sacrifice the caliber of people that we were looking to bring on board. So it was very important to us that we had access to a very rich pool of talent. In part, that also led us to the need for a location that was in close proximity to a nationally recognized university. So with RIT and U of R within the community here, that was very important. And a second reason to have that close proximity to the universities was not only to recruit that top talent that's graduating every year, but it was to look at research opportunities as well, doing collaborative research. So, in those same areas of natural language processing, data science, machine learning, we wanted to be able to leverage. We're a small startup. I'm a big fan of using other people's resources and other people's money for our customers' benefit. And so we're constantly looking for points of leverage. And having that close relationship with the universities really helps us. And then the last thing we were looking for is a city that has or is committed to developing that same kind of entrepreneurial culture that we really enjoy in San Francisco, that really leads to the kind of creative thinking and the level of ambition and excitement that being part of a startup can really deliver to people. And I see a lot of that in the Rochester area. That I went to RIT a long time ago. In fact, it felt compared to what it is today, it felt more like a community college. And it's blossomed incredibly. And one of the things that most struck me when I went back to campus in February is the entrepreneurial, innovative kind of spirit on campus, the investment in the Simone Center. I was here a month ago, and I got to be a practice coach for the Tiger Tank competition, which is just an incredible competition. And the fact that the university is making that kind of investment, and the community here is so committed to trying to build that high-tech renaissance within the downtown community, I think is something that we're really bought into and really excited about participating in.
Yeah, sorry. Obviously, the tie for us to university is a big deal. So, we regularly have co-ops and interns, and we are also involved with data science and some of the stuff that goes on, particularly at U of R. I'd like to actually have it a little bit more with RIT as an RIT grad as well. But I go back to RIT every year. I'm a member of the Industrial Advisory Board for Computer Engineering, and it blows me away every year the quality of the student projects and the things that they are doing there are totally different than what I was doing 20 years ago when I graduated from RIT. And it's amazing to me the level at which these kids are really, kids is probably the wrong word, but the graduates are really developing and coming out of those universities, and it just gives us a fantastic pool of people to attract into our company, and they just have that energy that comes out of those schools. We want to keep them here. You know, like you were saying, I grew up in Rochester. I want to keep people here that are smart. I want to keep people here that want to do these things, that want to be involved in technology, want to drive entrepreneurial spirit and bring the next level of technology, artificial intelligence, and these things, and make Rochester a name across the world. So it's a big deal for us as well, with both RIT and U of R, but also MCC, really. So.
All three of you are equipped with a slightly different worldview, a vantage point that's different from most people who are just getting on with their life locally. You have the perspective of an international organization. You've done business all over the country. Brand Networks has 8 different units or different locations, a presence in 8 different locations. What would be your observations about the culture here? How we perhaps even approach economic development? And let's be, when you hear about economic development, there's still a traditional mentality around manufacturing, and I'm hearing AI, big data. We haven't heard blockchain today. But you're hearing all about these technologies that aren't baked into a system that has existed for many years. Like, I want you to comment and talk about what you've seen, and perhaps some of the deficits. If you don't recognize deficits, we're not going to address them adequately. And that's not a criticism to anyone associated with economic development or community.
Right. So in terms of like economic development, also the people aspect?
Well, I want to talk the culture, because what I'm observing is a phenomenon, and where the market should be pulling us. I mean, when you talk to, for instance, Aaron Newman, software rules, and what we're seeing is something, a momentum around software with Zato, CloudTrail, your companies. This is not photonics, okay? And I'm not dismissing the importance of basic research on a university campus and getting government support. But there's something going on here. And you guys, we haven't talked about, last night we had an event, the pay scale and the benefits are quite high. And there's a multiplier effect. We know when people are paid well, they cause other jobs to emerge in the community. So I want to talk about the culture and what you've observed relative to other communities, how we can shore it up, actually accelerate this phenomenon a lot.
Yeah, from our perspective, the working with the economic development teams, it was interesting. I mean, I think on the plus side, we had a great experience in developing relationships over a short period of time, and I still joke that we developed the relationships from Thanksgiving to the end of February, which is the worst time most people think to bring a bunch of Australians to Rochester, but it worked out great. We did a lot of fun things along the process, but really develop relationships with folks. The challenge, I think, is that the economic model in New York State still values capital expenditure, capital investment, and machines and equipment and things that depreciate, such as buildings and machines and so forth. If you walk into our office, you see people, you may see a keg. You see a lot of things that don't represent people pushing buttons every day, but they are working on a keyboard. So workforce development and being able to accelerate hiring, keep those people interested and trained. We were talking to another gentleman, and he's like, keeping his best people interested in kind of where you're going is one of the biggest challenges. So we've got to do a lot of things to expose people to new technology, but also technology that has a real place in the world with our customers. So there's a fine balance there. And a lot of that came out in our interactions. And I'll give everyone a lot of credit, the state, county, everybody, Jerry, helping navigate that process and realizing what was important to us. The comment on the people side, I think we're kind of getting that too, is the differences in regions that I noticed. It's funny. One of the things that we did was it came down to North Carolina and New York, and then we also had another opportunity in Sligo, Ireland. And we ended up opening up a small operation there for a solutions team in Sligo, about 30 people. And a lot of the I wouldn't draw any analogies from Sligo to Rochester, other than the fact that maybe Sligo is compared to Dublin much in the same way maybe we compared to New York City. But the conversations when we have it with early candidates, because we started interviewing before we had anything inked, was people wanted to know, what are you working on, where are you going, what are your values, what's the career progression look like? Those are the conversations. The conversations that we have in other cities are, how much stock do I get, what's my base salary, are you going to pay for my parking, those types of things. So it's just a different feel. I said this last night, but I'll joke again, just because Bob Duffy's in the room and I like talking about Bob Duffy. Our CEO jumped off the stage and gave Bob a hug because he thinks everyone here is so happy. And there was something that's independent. I did not prep these guys for anything, but Carl, as the CEO, just got a real good vibe for people here in town. So that was not only through the economic development process, but the people he came in contact with, and I think is representative of the 75 employees we've got on the floor now. So it's been great.
Yeah, I think our experience was similar. So I think a lot of the history of New York has been more on the hardware side of things. It's been the chip fabs and manufacturing and photonics, et cetera. And I think, not at the exclusion of those, but I think the future really is in software. There's software in everything, right? Name something in your house that doesn't have software in it. So I think that the opportunity is, as a community, to do the same thing that universities like RIT are doing. They're looking forward to say, what are the next trends that are coming, and how do we develop programs in anticipation of those next trends, so that we can start building the curriculum and hiring the academic leadership to be able to produce the students who are going to fuel growth in those areas. So Rochester has a lot of the ingredients. You've got the universities are primed. I think you have to look at really doing a little bit of a shift away from the things that have created growth in the past to the things that are going to start to fuel more aggressive growth in the future. I'm a software guy, so it's I'm going to say it's all about software. As we went through the process, first I'll couch this by saying that state, county, and local officials have been very receptive, very responsive. But I'll give you a brief example. As we went through the application process, we thought, hey, there's some training credits that we can receive as part of our application process. And the qualifications for the training credits were that it had to be a certain percentage of capital expenditure. We have no capital, so that it was an immediate disqualifier. And then we were asked to identify the 3 companies that conduct the training in classroom sessions and what the curriculum for those courses would be. We don't do that. We're, again, 29 guys and a dog. If we need skill set, we'll tell somebody in 6 months, you need to be conversant in computational linguists, and there's a great course up on Coursera. You should take that course and we'll pay for it for you. That's how we do training. We do a la carte training, knowing that the pace of the change in technology is so rapid that we're constantly retooling and retraining and upping our skill set. And there's a wealth of information, edX, Coursera, Udemy, Udacity, all of those places are great to get just-in-time kind of training. So that's the model. So I think we need to do a little bit of re-engineering to say, what are the businesses that we're trying to attract? What are the unique needs of those businesses compared to a lot of the incentives that we've provided in the past? The other thing I would mention is I think there's an opportunity. Investment drives the kind of growth in the entrepreneurial space that we're talking about. I don't worry about raising money in Silicon Valley. There's a lot of VC money out there, and if you've been successful with startups, you're going to build those relationships, and a lot of times those VCs are going to look to put you in another portfolio company or follow you where you go and look to double down to get another gain. We've got a very fragmented, what I believe is a very fragmented investment community here in Rochester and in the upstate area, and I'm still trying to map it out a lot. But I think there's an opportunity, whether it's Rochester and Boston, New York City, or San Francisco, to start to build some relationships between the VC community, the investment community here in those much more mature and robust investment communities as well. I also think instead of strictly looking at organic growth, I think you've done a great job of building some incubators that can start to provide the tool set that entrepreneurs need to start to bootstrap businesses. The three of us came from elsewhere, so I think the opportunity, if EmployeeChannel is successful, I believe we could serve as a boilerplate for other California, Silicon Valley-based companies to continue following suit. And that can be a great accelerator in terms of bringing a lot of jobs and a lot of opportunity to the area.
I love talking about culture and as it relates to Rochester, because we have quarterly surveys we do with our company, and it consistently Rochester ranks as the highest in overall happiness and satisfaction. They're happy with everything. Our team, and I'm sure it's all me, but I mean, being serious, we've interviewed people from San Francisco, and one gentleman in particular stuck with me because he said he gets up in the morning, he gets his kids in the car, he drives them 2 hours into the city, he drops them off at daycare, he goes to work, he works 10 hours or however many hours, he picks his kids up from daycare, drives 2 hours home, puts them in bed. That's a tough life to lead, right? Now there's benefits to some of those things. People in Rochester don't really necessarily have to make those choices. I have 3 daughters myself. I get to see them a lot in the evenings. I get to work really early and try to leave at a reasonable hour so I can spend a few hours with them, quality time in the evenings and quality time on the weekends and things like that. The salaries that we pay, I think, are great in this area. You can live a very, very happy, life where you don't have to worry about your salaries. And I know that, yes, salary scales in some cases in those areas, but having employed technology specialists and engineers, software developers in Los Angeles and software developers here in Rochester, knowing the cost of living between those two places, it doesn't scale the same thing. It doesn't. And I think there's a lot of choices that you have to make when you go to some of these other areas that you don't really have to make here. And there are a lot of things that you can do. Yes, it's not the same as being in New York. We don't have Broadway. We don't have some of these other things. But I think some of these things are coming. We can do better. These are places where we can invest to help drive that sort of cultural section of, as a city forward as well, which I think will be great. The one thing that I think that there's sometimes a deficiency, and I don't know if it's probably part of the company, but I think there's a general issue here that I've seen in every company I've worked here in Rochester is geographic isolation does keep you sometimes segregated from your core customers. And when technology specialists don't really get in front of their customers, they don't really understand the problems that they're solving, they become isolated, and the solutions that they're creating become science projects or experiments versus actually solving the core need. So these are things that I think companies that are across multiple sites, or maybe the core customers like ours are in New York and the big media sites like LA and stuff, you just have to make a concerted effort to actually get your teams in front of those people so that they understand the problems that they're trying to solve, they understand the context of what they're doing. But man, from a culture perspective, it is really hard to beat. Yes, February is terrible, but I mean the reality is it's a pretty great place to live overall, and it's just borne out in the results that we see overall.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the quality of life and cost of living is a really big factor.
It's huge.
I said earlier that salary inflation in the Bay Area is pretty extreme. At the same time, if you're a recent grad and you're working for a startup, even if you're getting paid very well, you're going to be chasing buying your first house for decades. You may never get there, right? It may be accelerating faster than your salary is growing in the Bay Area. Not the case out here, right? We can pay very competitive salaries, and people can afford within a reasonable time frame to put that down payment on their home or to start thinking about building a family. And I think that's not only good for the employee, but that's good for the company as well. I think when you're a graduate and you're working in Silicon Valley and you have aspirations of buying a house, it's going to color the way you make decisions on a personal basis. And so if the phone rings and someone's willing to pay you an extra $5,000 in salary, you start to see a lot of churn. And I think that's what we're starting to see a lot. There's There's a lot more churn going on in the Bay Area. The large companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, are gobbling up technical talent like nobody's business. And so if you're a startup, it's pretty hard for you to attract talent, and even more importantly, retain talent that you're making a big investment in. So I think that leads to a much healthier environment here as well.
Yeah, retention is a huge thing for us too here in Rochester. The retention rates here in Rochester, technologists tend to turn over, I think, over 5 years or somewhere in that range. It's just, you want to chase new technology, try a new thing, whatever. I think it's very healthy. It drives some new ideas. It's people, crossing between different domains and things like that. It's really out the thing. But in our Santa Monica office in particular, the turnover was a lot higher, and the competition is really strong. And to your point, if you are struggling, if you're sleeping on a cot and somebody else is room, if you have a roommate in your 30s, and you feel that hey, I've got an extra $5 grand coming at me, you're likely to take it. Whereas here we can pay very competitively. People, tend to be set out very well. We don't have the same pressures.
This is great. Briefly, what I'm hearing is that these wonderful companies that can grow very quickly and employ people at very relatively high salaries have a consciousness about the importance of the community, because it's not about capital equipment, it's about human capital. And human capital we have in abundance in this market. And using that word market, I think it seems like we have a marketing exercise ahead of us, business speak, in terms of getting the word out and spreading it, and perhaps creating more competition for you to retain your employees. Which is, I think, to tell you the truth, entrepreneurs understand and appreciate that type of job hopping, keeps you honest. But also, you don't intend to have someone for 20 years. In fact, you probably don't want to be there in 20 years. But on that note, we have some time for Q&A. I know we're limited with time, and I want to abide by our restrictions. So if you have a question, there is a mic somewhere in the room. If you feel you need a mic and your voice isn't loud enough to carry, does someone know where it is? Yeah. Otherwise, anyone have any questions for our panel? We have about 5 minutes or so. Heidi, I know you have a loud voice.
I hope so. Thanks very much for your comments. That's really been eye-opening. Question for all three of you. Do you think the U of R and RIT are turning out enough grad... Can you... Better? Okay. Do you think the U of R and RIT, are their programs big enough? Are they turning out enough talent? We've been hearing for a while about competition from, huge outside, the Googles and Amazons of the world. They're literally at one end of the graduation stage. Do we need to think about that here, doubling the size of some of our programs? And a corollary to that is, how far are we in the software end of things, having enough critical mass of jobs that if I'm a software engineer, I feel like I can make choices in different companies in this region?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I don't know that we've hit that wall by any stretch. I mean, we're so new. I think for us, what we're trying to do is we're building around roles that don't fit a job description in many ways. Much like what Mark said, we're really combining different skill sets and then doing that just-in-time training kind of concept as well. AI is an output, but it's built from machine learning and language processing and all these other things that has actually been around for many years. Machine learning has been around since the 50s. So from that perspective, we feel very good about where particularly the graduate programs are going. In our case, we've worked a lot with President Munson and RIT, but we're also plugged in at U of R now to start doing that. And I think the way we tend on solving for that is to actually collaborate with them on some other research, as opposed to just saying, okay, who do you got for us this quarter? When we came in, we actually missed the co-op cycle. So we ended up hiring 10 interns over the summer, which was good, and kind of floated them back and forth between New York City. But for right now, I feel like we've got that. The nice thing about it too, I was thinking about this earlier, is that of the tech companies that are sort of in the news now, we're sort of collaborative with each other, and unintentionally too. I think that will get better over time. Is that we're all sort of different businesses. I think maybe it'll be a nice situation if we actually get to be coaching each other's employees, maybe, but not right now, because right now we're sort of trying to help each other. So I think the companies like Datto and R3 and the universities are all thinking about how to solve that and create that community over time. But a side note to that, or correlated to that, is also, I think there's an obligation with some of us too, that we create connections to other companies. I tend to subscribe less to it's Silicon Valley or Rochester or New York. That's just that's not the conversation to have. It's how do we do both, because both help build a sustainable business. And in our case, just proximity to New York made a lot of sense for us. But for us, we want to give our employees a chance to go join and maybe live in Rochester, but spend a month a year in New York or whatever they want to do. So hopefully all that comes full circle. But I think the universities are pretty deep right now.
Yeah, I don't worry about the pipeline of resources, for the next 5 years. If things go wild, which we hope they will, then that's a great problem to have, and we'll work with the universities to figure out how to build a bigger pipeline. I also think we can look beyond the U of R's and RITs and even MCC. I can see Dev Bootcamp in Rochester being another great source of talent, which can fill maybe a different segment of the jobs that we have and open up a broader opportunity that says you don't have to have a bachelor's in fill in the blank to participate in a startup environment. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well. The thing that I think is part of what makes Silicon Valley tick is both the density of companies and the networking that goes on. So I love retaining top talent. I hate to lose good people. But sometimes a developer will grow and say, hey, the next step for me professionally is I want to be an architect. And I go, that's great, but I've already got an architect and I don't have a need for a second one. I'm going to help that person find a position elsewhere that will continue their personal growth. And that's not a bad thing. I'm extending my network. Now I have a broader network and I've seeded people elsewhere in the organization or elsewhere within the community. And I think the first thing to focus on is getting enough critical mass here where there really is that software community where there's a lot of exchange of ideas, there's very open kind of an environment, and then once you get that tipping point, magic starts to happen.
So to add to those things, love the question. I'll start with the second part first. I actually think we are at a pretty good place as far as critical mass for computer science, software engineering, computer engineering. Graduated in computer engineering, I never had any concerns about changing jobs, always had plenty of opportunities, people calling, things like that. I think we kind of forget about some of the older businesses we actually have in the area that do a lot of software and computer engineering. We have the Harrises of the world, they have a ton of people there. We have Alstom that's found right, just south of RIT. There's a lot of companies, even Paychex. We've lost people to Paychex recently because they're kind of turning around their business and really kind of moving their business forward from a software perspective. At the same time, we have the cloud checkers, the Datos, and some of the other names that we've been talking about here, our companies, obviously. So I think that if you're in technology in Rochester, you have a ton of opportunities. As far as the amount of graduates coming out of the schools, RIT and U of R, we actually had somebody that came out of a boot camp that was one of our press developers on the West Coast. It was fantastic. I'm going to actually go lower than that with kids in elementary and middle schools and things like that now. I think that's where the problem is right now. Because I do actually think that we're not graduating enough people, probably to fulfill the need in the long term. But I think the problem is more STEM opportunities and really integrated STEM in those levels. Right now, it still feels like at those primary, elementary, middle levels in particular. I don't have a kid in high school yet, so I can't speak to that. But it does feel like it's still a bowl time. Computer time or whatever is not a core part of those curriculum. And some kids just naturally incline towards math and science. My wife and I were both engineers. My kids seem to kind of be tending that way, but that's because we have a culture of that in our household. I feel that there's probably a bunch of people that don't ever get exposed to it early enough. They don't know that this is a possibility for them in a real way, and we aren't setting kids up early enough to really explore this as a possibility. So I think that's where the problem is. I think RIT and U of R would love to have just a ton of kids that are coming out of these schools ready to enter into STEM type of graduate programs or boot camp type of situations. That would be fantastic. But you really have to be kind of proactive about that at this point.
Great. I want to wrap up and just summarize a couple of observations I've seen in the community. Software is here, it's real, and we're blessed to have it. Not everyone is aware of how much value in the last 5 or so years have been created by some software companies. Just last year, the number of liquidity events that totaled hundreds of millions of dollars, Datto, Cloud Checker, Bioelectronics, iCardiac, Catertrax, all software companies. They're not readily visible to the greater community, but it's happening. And before we bring this to an end, I want you to also contemplate what the world might look like if we continue on this path and we support the software sector. In 3, 5, 7 years from now, there will be baby EmployeeChannel, baby Datto. This is how it worked in the Valley and in these other communities. These people who are working in these companies are witnessing world-class organizations being built at hyperspeed. They are learning from the masters, and they can start companies too, and they will. So I believe we have a bright future ahead of us. I'm glad you're all a part of it. Thank you, Innovative Solutions and the Chamber, for hosting us, and have a wonderful afternoon.